Things are going very well for the Vancouver Canucks as they continue to surprise a lot of people. But boy, the San Jose Sharks are looking sad right now. We've got that, our women's hockey spotlight, and a look at the week ahead, all coming up on today's Locked On NHL podcast.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome, everybody, to the Friday edition of the Locked On NHL podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to thank everyone for making Locked On NHL your first listen every day. Don't forget to subscribe on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so you can get new episodes as soon as they drop. And you can also hear us on SiriusXM on the SXM app. Just do a search for Locked On NHL. Happy Friday, Rachel.
Happy Friday.
Not a happy Friday in San Jose. It is in Vancouver. Wow, what happened last night? The Canucks 10-1 in San Jose, beating the Sharks. The Canucks look great, and the Sharks are still the only winless team in the National Hockey League.
Yeah, it's a tale of two cities, as they say. But what was crazy to me about that game, not only the 10-1 score, but the Canucks had 8 different goal scorers in that game. Nobody got a hat trick. Quinn Hughes with a phenomenal game, 5 points in that one. And so it really just kind of showed that the Canucks are starting to get more spread out scoring, right? It's not just one or two guys. They're really starting to involve more of their lineup here.
Yeah, and that's important for them. And they have been such a pleasant surprise, and the scoring depth is, I think, one of the reasons. And then you got to think Thatcher Demko has got to be a big reason as well.
Yeah, he's been playing really well. I will say, Flyers did shut them out, and I think really that's what spurred on this phenomenal scoring that they've. No, I'm just kidding. They're doing well on their own, but yeah, I do think that this is going to be a really fun season for the Canucks, and they may not be able to maintain this level of scoring or this high level, but they're going to be a much better team than last year overall. That's for sure. And I think it'll be a fun season for Canucks fans, which frankly, I'm not sure that they've had a truly fun season in a while. So I'm very happy for them.
Yeah, they are definitely one of the pleasant surprises of the early part of this season. And it does look like they have taken a big step forward. And what about, Quinn Hughes, you mentioned him before. The Hughes brothers just really sort of the next great hockey family, I think.
Yeah, Jack Hughes, of course, with the Devils, has the most points in the NHL right now with 20 points in 9 games. That is a remarkable pace. But then Elias Pettersson from the aforementioned Canucks is right there in the number 2 spot. So Pettersson is off to a tremendous season. And then Quinn Hughes right there in the 4 spot with 16 points. And 3 of the top 10 point getters in the NHL right now are from the Vancouver Canucks, JT Miller rounding out that group. But yeah, the Hughes brothers are really off to a good start. And Luke Hughes is off to a good start as a rookie as well for the Devils. He's not quite up there with his brothers in terms of the points yet, but as the rookies go, he's doing real well.
He is. And, we had the Howes and the Sutters, and I guess it's now time for the Hughes family to be prominent in hockey circles. Where do the San Jose Sharks go from here? How much worse can this get? Getting embarrassed by 9 goals at home, winless for October, still winless here early in November. I don't remember the last time I've seen a team get off to this bad a start.
Yeah, it is real bad. And I think that for the Sharks, obviously there's some new leadership involved there, and they've been making some wholesale changes. But at the same time, I think that they've been sort of in this rebuild like state for so long, and they spent last season entirely working toward getting a high draft pick. And you have to wonder, like, when you're doing a rebuild, you have to like improve on some levels, whether it's statistically or you have, a couple of guys who are outperforming expectations or something, even if you're losing these games. But it's hard to find any good in here, right?
Yeah, giving up 10 goals on your home ice. What was it? 4 power play goals. I mean, the numbers are just ugly, and this team is going to have to find something to hang its hat on before this really spirals out of control.
Yeah, and we were talking before recording, and you brought up the goal differential, negative 35 goal differential after only 10 games. Like that is really the difference here. And I think even with rebuilding teams or weaker teams, there are defensive systems that you can put into place that are going to mitigate that to some degree. Again, you still may lose those games, but you're going to mitigate the goal scoring against. And they've got to figure something out soon on that front.
Something's got to change. You can't have that bad of a goal differential this early in the season, and I mean, minus 35 in 10 games, no wins. Their overtime or shootout loss was at home, so they did give the fans the thrill of a point. But wow, 10 losses in a row, 45 goals against in 10 games. And then you had, an injury to your starting goaltender in that game yesterday. Basically, Capo Kakinen takes a knee to the head, leaves the game, and Mackenzie Blackwood has to finish up. But you feel bad for the goalies there just because they're facing so many shots and so many quality scoring chances.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, that's what's happening here. But man, like just thinking about how good Vancouver is doing right now versus how bad San Jose is right now. That is a wide swath in that division.
Compare and contrast. Yeah, it's definitely a big spread. Now, the NHL earlier this week, they held a press conference for the outdoor games, and you were there. Why don't you tell us
Yep.
your impressions of the upcoming Stadium Series in New Jersey?
Yeah, so I got to go out to MetLife Stadium, home of the New York Football Giants and New York Jets, and Taylor Swift, as many would also say. But yeah, it was a really cool event. This is the first time where they've had two different games with, four teams involved. And I know the guys in the Western Conference show talked about how to make outdoor games more exciting, and this is certainly a way to do it. Um, I think that one of the more interesting aspects of it, I got to talk to the director of event presentation for MetLife Stadium about, the changeover and the entertainment factor, and he's the most nervous about the changeover between the look and feel going from a Flyers Devils game to an Islanders Rangers game, and what they're going to do in the stadium on that front. But I do think it's going to be a really fun weekend. They announced that there will be a concert event Saturday night, and that that is a to be announced entertainer or entertainers. But Governor Phil Murphy was there from the state of New Jersey. They had a representative of the Jets, Nick Mangold. Carl Banks was there, New York Giants legend, and he was actually wearing the look and feel of the Stadium Series in an outfit. It wasn't like for either team, but you'll get a sense of what the look will be, and I think it's pretty sharp. And then, of course, all the representatives from all four teams were there, and Governor Murphy made a joke about he's going to definitely be rooting for the Devils in the Devils Flyers game because, New Jersey.
Right.
And Flyers president of hockey operations, Keith Jones, had to remind him that most of the Flyers live in New Jersey and the Flyers practice facility is in New Jersey. So maybe he can spare some thoughts for the Flyers as well. But that was pretty funny. But I think it's going to be a really cool event. It's a great stadium. The sight lines are going to be phenomenal. So, even if you're not a fan of one of those four teams, you want to make a really great weekend in New York of it. I think that would be really fun for any hockey fan.
Yeah, it should be a great time, and two games, two rivalry games on top of it. So yeah, something to really look forward to, and it's great that you were able to get out there and attend the press conference. We've got a lot more to get to on today's show. We have Erica L. Ayala coming up with our women's hockey spotlight. We'll also preview the weekend ahead. All that and more coming up on this episode of the Locked On NHL podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by Parkview Advance. As a business owner, you realize there are times when receivables might fall behind, but that doesn't mean you need to fall behind on vendor payments, payroll, or rent. For more than 25 years, Parkview Advance has helped businesses secure working capital. From $5,000 to $1.5 million, Parkview Advance can approve your working capital in as little as 24 hours. It's much easier a process than you might imagine. We invite the many entrepreneurs that are Locked On NHL fans to learn more by calling us at 203-675-0071 or go to parkviewadvance.com. If your business needs working capital, call Parkview Advance today. Parkview Advance, helping businesses with their working capital. Go to parkviewadvance.com. And today's episode is brought to you by Indeed. When you're drafting your fantasy team, do you ever wish you could do the same thing with your business team? If you're building a roster to win the league, you need Indeed. Indeed is the hiring platform where you can attract, interview, and hire all in one place. Don't spend hours on multiple job sites looking for candidates with the right skills when you can do it all with Indeed. Find top talent fast with Indeed's suite of powerful hiring tools like Indeed Instant Match, assessments, and virtual interviews. Hate waiting? Indeed's U.S. data shows over 80% of Indeed employers find quality candidates whose resume on Indeed matches their job description the moment they sponsor a job. Indeed knows when you're growing your own business, you have to make every dollar count. That's why with Indeed, you only pay for quality applications that match your must-have job requirements. Visit Indeed.com/lockedon to start hiring now. Just go to Indeed.com/lockedon, Indeed.com/lockedon. Terms and conditions apply. Cost per application pricing not available for everyone. Need to hire? You need Indeed. And it is time now for our bi-weekly Women's Hockey Spotlight. And it's my pleasure to welcome back Erica L. Ayala of Locked On Kraken and, of course, of Locked On NHL. Erica, how you doing?
I'm doing well, Gil. It's great to be back. The gang's all here.
It's nice to have you here in person. It's great.
Indeed, indeed. Well, we have plenty to talk about when it comes to women's hockey from the last women's hockey spotlight I did. So I believe the last update would have been on, just some of the locations for the teams. Just as a recap, there are 6 PWHL teams, and we talked a little bit about locations. We also, via some sleuthing and trademark applications, perhaps have some names that are being tossed around: the Toronto Torch, the Montreal Echo, the Ottawa Alert, the Minnesota Superior, the Boston Wicked, and the New York Sound. The Boston Wicked, I think my main comment there is just that, there's a special anniversary for the musical Wicked. So that's that's immediately where my mind went. But also,
we just had that this past weekend.
We'll see if these turn out to be the names. But what else has been interesting is that we've seen the PWHL use social media and its new website to announce some of its signings. And so some of the language is a little bit confusing. So I'm just going to go over what we know. As I've talked about before on the Women's Hockey Spotlight, each team had the opportunity to sign 3 players outright, effectively kind of their marquee players in the WNBA. You might say these are like their cord players. And those players for all 6 teams have been officially signed on their tracker. And then there have been additional signings, those coming from the draft in particular. So most of the teams, well, all of the teams have at least 4 players signed. So Montreal bringing up the rear. They only have 1 additional signing, Kristen O'Neill, outside of their main 3 cord players. But then Ottawa, on the other hand, has 11 signings, including Daryl Watts. You might have heard me talk about her before because she was set to be the highest paid player in women's professional hockey when she signed, I guess it was 200K Canadian with the, at the time, Toronto Six from the defunct Premier Hockey Federation. She signed a 1-year contract. Also, Haley Skamura signed with Ottawa as well. Other players, Jamie Lee Rattray and Teresa Schwarzwald, signing in Boston. And you have Jade Downey-Landry, who played in the PHF, and Ella Shelton signing in New York. I mentioned O'Neill signing in Montreal. You have also Rebecca Leslie, I believe, is the highest signed draft pick for Toronto. And for Minnesota, no surprise, Taylor Heisey has been signed. Their 3 cord players, effectively. I'm just going to use the term cord. It's not something the league is using, but it just helps me. Kendall Coyne, Schofield, Kelly Panic, Lee Steckline. They definitely are going for that local, feel. Nicole Hensley is also signed, was one of their draft picks, and Grace Zumwinkle. So also a lot of national team flair there.
Yeah, it's really interesting with the team signings where you look at a team like Minnesota, they've signed their top 3 draft picks. And some of the teams, it's more spread out. So there's some top draft picks, there's some lower round draft picks. Is this just a timing and negotiation thing, or is there some rhyme or reason to this?
Yeah, and that's where we just don't know enough, to be quite honest, with this kind of first round of signings. Are they draft pick signings? Are they free agent signings? We've had that in women's hockey before, where there were draft picks, but they were effectively free agents. So I think some of the language itself is confusing. Also, right after the draft, I was able to go to the draft in Toronto. Some of what you were hearing is that European players, and when we interviewed them, they were saying that they committed to some of the Euro leagues up to a point, and that they then had to either negotiate with that club to be released from that contract. Some had signed European contracts with the expectation that they would be leaving for the new league. And then what we've heard since, Rachel, is that there is question whether some of those players that have signed contracts in Europe are going to come over to the PWHL and I've effectively exercised their draft rights. I don't know how much autonomy the players have versus the clubs, but some of those players might not come over and play in the inaugural season of the PWHL that is set to drop the puck in January. It's already November, so we're ticking down the clock here. Not to mention that there are draft picks who are going to have to wait to know their fate, because we're going to have training camps that are set to start this month that will likely happen after the Rivalry Series. So some of those national team players can be back with their local PWHL teams.
I know that rosters are not set yet, and it's still a work in progress. But is there one team right now whose signings have impressed you the most?
Well, I mean, just by the sheer amount, I'm definitely looking at Ottawa. And Ottawa has been a team that has impressed me in how they even approached the draft. So I think that's really interesting. You definitely want to take a look also at what Minnesota has been able to do and locking in a goaltender like Nicole Hensley. We know some other teams Maybe some interesting picks when it comes to goalies, and still trying to figure out who their marquee goaltenders are going to be. But we know how important goaltending is. And so I think Minnesota maybe caught up in some areas that I thought were a little bit questionable, for them immediately following the draft.
Talk to us about the Rivalry Series. What do we know about that?
So we're getting started. The Rivalry Series is going to the Mullet, Tempe, Arizona. That's the last time I was there was for the PHF, what turned out to be the last Isabel Cup championship, where the Toronto Six won. But that's going to happen November 8th. So coming up November 8th and again November 11th. They're going to be at crypto.com. So first going to Mullet Arena in Tempe, and then to LA. So right off the hop, you see that the United States, USA Hockey, and Hockey Canada are really taking advantage, I should say, of their NHL partnerships. I would love to see if any of the NHL arenas do what the Seattle Kraken did and what Climate Pledge Arena did, and actually offer their NHL broadcast team to call these games. We see that all of them are going to be on the NHL network, but we got spoiled to hear John Forsland and Allison Lucan call the Rivalry Series game when it was at Climate Pledge Arena at CPA. So I'm hoping that we see some of that. And we do have a few other opportunities. I mentioned Mullet, crypto.com, also the Excel Center. Those are the locations in the US. And then there's 4 more between December 14th and February 9th that will be in Canada.
I'm really curious because the Rivalry Series locations in the US are all at NHL arenas. The ones in Canada are all at non-NHL arenas in other locations, Kitchener, Ontario, Sarnia, Saskatoon. And I think that it's just a really interesting difference in strategy there, and that, bringing the Rivalry Series to maybe some non-NHL markets in the US might be a good thing.
I think you can think of it both ways. Yes, it would be great to have more access in the United States to, quote unquote, non-NHL markets. But on the other side of things, hockey fans in those areas are likely familiar with the NHL arenas, and you can get more people there. And what we've seen from the Rivalry Series, whether it was, I believe it was Montreal that hosted, that's Bell Center, right? Yeah. And then again at Climate Pledge Arena, those Rivalry Series games last year were the highest grossing in attendance for the Rivalry Series ever, and for women's hockey ever. So on the one hand, if you're looking at maybe wanting to get local markets involved, I can see where you're coming from, Rachel. On the other hand, I feel like maybe you're arbitrarily capping the attendance and therefore, what you make at the gate by perhaps not engaging NHL markets in Canada.
Got some news about Harvard, Ven Lehovy joining Harvard. Talk to me about that.
Yeah, for sure. Well, first of all, if you are chomping at the bit like I am for women's hockey to hit the ice again, and just watching NHL games until we get some more of that. The good news is that we have the NCAA, and as I mentioned, the Rivalry Series coming. But I really wanted to spend some time talking about Ven Lehovy because she is a hockey mind, particularly on the women's side and the international level, that understands how hockey is evolving. And I was so excited. We actually had a women's hockey spotlight episode featuring her and her plans for the Riveters, and then everything changed. So we weren't able to push that through. But Ven Lehovy is going to be an assistant coach for the Harvard team. Harvard is a storied program. So many Olympians have come out of that program. It's also worth noting that Harvard has gone through a change and really hasn't been forthcoming with a quote unquote reckoning after some very odd traditions, including a naked Superman skate. I mean, I don't know. Hopefully I don't have to explain that anymore. Just bare flesh on ice and in a Superman pose. So that would be chest down. So on the one hand, this is great for Venla Hovey. This is great for hockey. On the other hand, I personally am going to keep a keen eye on how the Harvard program is not just moving on, but also how they're addressing some things culturally that have been longstanding for the last 30 plus years under their former head coach.
Well, we'll definitely keep an eye on that. Erica, thank you so much. Great to have you here, and looking forward to having you back in 2 weeks.
Always a pleasure. And so don't forget, you can find the Rivalry Series. That's going to be on NHL Network. Don't know who the broadcast teams are yet, but I will be back in another 2 weeks, as you mentioned, Gil, to recap that and get you ready for what we know coming up for the PWHL season.
This episode is brought to you by BetterHelp. Have you ever wondered why you struggle sometimes? Therapy can help you figure out what's holding you back so you can work for yourself instead of against yourself. It's helpful for determining how to make decisions more effectively. You learn positive coping skills and how to set boundaries. It empowers you to be the best version of yourself. It isn't just for those who've experienced major trauma or a specific incident. Anyone can benefit. So if you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online and designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. You just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist, and you can switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Make your brain your friend with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/lockedonnhl today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedonnhl.
All right, and thanks again to Erica Ayala for our bi-weekly women's hockey spotlight. Always good to have her on the show. And Rachel, we've got a busy weekend of hockey ahead.
We do. We are back to the 2 games on Friday, a whole bunch of games on Saturday, and then 2 games on Sunday schedule. Again in the NHL. But our 2 games tonight involve my Philadelphia Flyers at Buffalo. This is the second half of a home and home in which Buffalo won the first one. So hopefully the Flyers can get back at it and win this one on the road. It's a first half of a back-to-back where the Flyers play the Kings on Saturday. So tough weekend ahead. Plus New Jersey at St. Louis, which I think should be a real interesting one.
Yeah, the Blues, they've got to get things figured out. They're off to a little bit of a disappointing start, and the Devils seem to be finding themselves lately.
Yeah, in a scary sort of way for the rest of us in the Metro.
Exactly. Saturday, as you mentioned, the big day on the schedule, 2 matinees at 3:00, Nashville and Edmonton, and then Winnipeg at Arizona. And the Coyotes continue to surprise a lot of people.
Yeah, they have been, and I think it's a real interesting matchup, especially because those 2 teams are right next to each other in the standings in the Central Division right now. And I think it'll be a good kind of benchmark for both of these teams as to kind of where they stand this early in the season.
The Boston Bruins take their unbeaten in regulation record, put it on the line in Detroit in a big Original Six and division rivalry game. Can the Red Wings beat the Bruins in regulation?
Well, certainly rooting for that to happen on my end. But yeah, Detroit is kind of coming back to earth a little bit right now. So it's going to be a tough ask, but it is at home for them. So I'm going to say that they can do it.
All right, we will see. Buffalo and Toronto. That's always a good rivalry as well.
Yeah, that cross-border experience that they have. This one, of course, in Toronto. But I do think that Buffalo is starting to find its mojo here. The problem is that division is just so rough that to climb their way back up is going to be a difficult challenge, even though they're playing very well right now. So hopefully they can start doing that with this in-division matchup for them.
The New York Islanders will be hosting the Carolina Hurricanes at 7:30 Eastern time. That's a rematch of the team that eliminated the Islanders in the playoffs last year. And Carolina, their team defense has been surprisingly shaky early in the season, although it's been better as of late.
Yeah, I think that's been a big part of what's going on with them this season so far. And, the Islanders are just doing the Islanders thing, and they're not going to let anything about what the other team is doing stand in their way of that, we'll say.
The New York Rangers in Minnesota to take on the Wild, and the Wild can't seem to find themselves early in the season.
Yeah, they're having a real tough go of it. And I think that at least when I saw them play the Flyers, they're not really reacting to adversity really well. They just get really despondent when things aren't going their way. And I think that's something that they're going to need to get over in order to get through whatever it is right now. They've lost 4 games in a row at this point, and that can be really tough on guys like on a losing streak like that. And I just think this is something that they're going to have to get better at, is responding to losses.
Well, we'll see if they can do that at home against the Rangers. Can the Sharks win their first game of the year? They're playing the Penguins, another struggling team in
Yeah.
San Jose. When's the pool going to get started as to when San Jose wins their first game?
Well, you feel like if there's any team that San Jose can beat at this point, it might be the Penguins, given how things are going for them right now. But I don't know, man. The way they've been playing and the personnel that they have right now, you have to think Pittsburgh has a good shot at winning this one.
We shall see. The interesting game there. And then 2 really good games between 4 really hot teams. Dallas in Vancouver, 7-1-1 against 7-2-1, and then Colorado and Vegas going head to head in Las Vegas as the Golden Knights try to keep their not losing yet in regulation streak alive.
Yeah, that's a hell of a late schedule for the NHL this early in the season, with the teams that are really, yeah, at the top of the league right now on many fronts. And so I am excited for both of them.
Yeah, should be a couple of really good games. Sunday, only 2 games on the schedule. The Devils in Chicago to take on the Blackhawks. And then Vegas goes back into action against the Anaheim Ducks, who quietly are 6-4 on the season and looking much better.
Yeah, the Ducks have won 5 in a row, and are playing very good hockey right now, and are getting scoring from unusual places, I think, in their lineup, and that's a good thing for them. Could they be the team that beats Vegas in regulation? Honestly, very possible. Very possible, I think.
We shall see. It'll certainly be an interesting game to wrap up the entertaining hockey weekend that we have ahead. I want to thank everyone for making Locked On NHL your first listen every day, everydayers. Monday on the show, I will be back talking with 3 of our local hosts about the biggest stories from around the league, including we'll talk a little Connor Bedard. So make sure you join us for that. Want to thank Erica L. Ayala for joining us for our bi-weekly Women's Hockey Spotlight. Have a great weekend, everyone, and thanks for listening to and watching the Locked On NHL podcast.